So welcome everyone. I'm pleased to see so many people, at least in this conversation room. It's a minor miracle that I'm standing at the podium and faced in the right direction, but I can't see the audience at this point, and I'm still learning all of the particulars of this world, but it's been quite intriguing, although a bit of a challenge. In any case, let me tell you who I am and why I'm going to be chatting with you today about the topic. My name is Alan Salmi. I'm originally from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is why I'm listed as the Youper here in this Second Life world. A Youper is a resident of the UP Upper Peninsula, and there's actually a recording of the first person who figured out the word Youper. So that explains my name. I first started studying the tarot in the 1970s. That's when I first bought a deck, but I didn't know at all what I was doing. When I finally made it to the University of Michigan for my undergrad, I had a class from a local occultist who ran a bookstore. And that was in about 1980. And what he did was truly marvelous, because he made it possible to learn the minor arcana cards very quickly. So right away, there were 40 cards that were available to me, and I had the key to understanding their meanings. And that's what I'm going to be doing today. If we have a little bit of time, I'll also talk about the court cards and how I handle them. Now, I will be mostly referencing the Smith-Waite deck. A lot of you may call it the Rider-Waite deck, but that name became popular largely because of the sexism of the time, because all of that marvelous artwork was done by a woman, so they didn't give her any credit for it. Her name was Pixie Smith, and as a result of the deck being the most reproduced and most common deck in the world, she is the most reproduced artist of all time, with thousands, if not millions, of reproductions of her artwork everywhere. The person directing the project to do this deck was Arthur Edward Waite, or as some people call him, Wisdom While You Wait. Partly because if you ever tried to read any of his stuff, his prose is extremely dense. It takes a lot. If he had a simple way of saying something, he would avoid it. But what happened was he was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And those members were required, as part of their initiation system, to actually devise a tarot deck and make it up themselves from the instructions that they were given. And Waite basically got an artist to put things together. And what he did, which I got to give him some credit for, is he said, look, instead of just showing 5 coins or 6 cups, he actually had little scenes that give a basic idea of what he saw as the meanings of the cards. Now, I have a little difficulty with a few of those cards' meanings, but essentially it made it a lot easier to memorize the cards and to get an idea of at least those 40 in the minor arcana. So let's make a distinction here. The minor arcana are the ones that are ace through 10, and that's what I'm going to focus on today. There are the court cards, which are the king, queen, and page. In some decks, there's a knight instead of the page and that sort of thing. But we're going to stick with the Waite-Smith deck here. And And then there are the major arcana cards, which most people are familiar as the 22, the ones that you see a lot of reproductions of, things like the Fool card and the Universe card and the Devil and the Tower and things like that. I won't be referencing those today because that's a whole other lecture and a whole other way of looking at things. But what I will be doing today is giving you a key to those 40. And what's really neat about that is once you know those, you would be able to use a deck of regular cards, playing cards, from the associations in the system that I'm going to give you today and actually read with those. A lot of people seem to be very impressed with reading with an ordinary playing card deck. But you'll be able to see that once you get an idea of all of this, it's actually not all that difficult. So let's take a look at the basic idea of the 40 minor arcana cards. For one thing, the biggest division that most everybody understands is that they are 4 suits, usually depicted as pentacles, sometimes called coins, cups, rods or staves, and swords. Now, what's really interesting about this is that while the original tarot decks were invented in the late Renaissance, and that's what we know historically, they did not come from Egypt, they did not come from the Rom, otherwise known as the gypsies, although many gypsies will be insulted if you call them gypsies, so it's preferable to call them Rom or Romani. What it appears that we have is a game that was invented that used common motifs at the time that were used by the church to teach people things like temperance and, the Tower of Babel and justice. For those people who want to look more at the symbolism of the cards and go really deeply into it, I recommend a book called Tarot Symbolism by Robert O'Neill. Unfortunately, it's out of print. You'd have to pay about $80 for it, but if you're going to be serious about tarot, you may want to look into that. But a lot of that is focused more on the major arcana. That is spelled correctly, Robert O'Neill. He's also a PhD biologist, and one of his papers is one of the most cited in biology. Genius guy, and he just got into tarot symbolism. Met him at a tarot conference once. Really interesting character. But what happened was when the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn came along in the late 1800s, and they attempted to synthesize together all of the Western occult traditions, they used previous work that had been done by people, and they said, wait a minute, there are 22 major arcana, there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and we can start looking at how things fit together astrologically. And they synthesized a whole bunch of stuff, and that synthesis has had a tremendous effect on Western occultism, especially in the English-speaking world. You will find that those ideas have made their way into Wicca, and they've made their way into Wicca because most of the folks in England that were occultists back then knew each other. They would go to the Rosicrucian Theater together. They were initiates in each other's orders. For instance, the founder of modern Wicca, that most people are familiar with, Gerald Gardner, was involved, I believe, in the Rosicrucian Theater at the time, but he was also an initiate of Le Droit Humain, or the human rights lineage of co-Freemasonry, which I was a member of for about 10 years. It's an esoteric branch of Freemasonry that lets women in on an equal basis. So ladies, if you are interested, look up co-Freemasonry, the French branch. Be careful, there are a few groups that have split off from there, and I do not recommend them, partly because they broke their oaths in order to form break-off groups. But if you go to comasonic.org, I believe, or co-masonry, and especially the one connected up with France, that's the particular group that Gerald Gardner was a member of. In any case, there was quite a bit of cross-fertilization of knowledge and everything that happened during that time. It was actually probably a very exciting time because you could go into a cafe and sit down with someone, and Aleister Crowley might wander in and chat with you in the cafe, and you could sit and talk with Gerald Gardner and or William Butler Yeats, for that matter, the Nobel Prize-winning poet. But it was a marvelous time, and so the modern deck and Waite's deck came out of that whole cross-fertilization period. Now, let's look at those 4 suits, and what I'd like you to do, because I don't have a diagram, is, and since you are all magicians, you should be able to come up with a very simple diagram in your mind. I'd like you to imagine a horizontal line and a vertical line, and the vertical line cuts the horizontal line right at the halfway point. So you have a large X, just like you had in geometry class, an X and a Y axis. Above the line are your active elements. They are fire and air. Now, fire and air, the natural movement is to go up. And active elements are the ones that cause things to adapt to them. So if a person is more fiery or more airy, they take on the world and make it adapt to them. Below the line are water and earth. They adapt to the world. Just like those people who 7 of 9 would say, you will adapt. That's the water and earth elements. They manage to deal with the world and adapt to it as opposed to taking charge of it. Now, that's a very simplified diagram, but it is useful for a number of different reasons. Now, the left side of the diagram, left of the vertical line, the world is seen as being slightly hostile, or you have to be careful, or you have to be wary. The right side of the vertical line, the world is seen as being friendly, and the world is seen as being more focused on relationship. And with those 4 dimensions, you get properties of the 4 elements. For those of you who are really interested in this, I have a lecture on YouTube called The 4 Humors, The 4 Elements, The 4 Humors, Timothy Leary, and Wonder Woman. And I actually tie all 4 of those together and show them how they fit. But for our purposes today, just think of those 4 boxes. The upper left-hand area is an active element, and it is air. Or no, that's fire, sorry. And so it is trying to get things to adapt to it. And it is in charge of things. And it is the type of person and the type of element that is the take charge kind of element. So a fiery kind of person would be great at leading a group in a difficult struggle. But they are also going to be careful, and they're going to look for enemies to vanquish or conquer. The other side of that vertical line is air, and they are going to be looking to talk and create alliances by communication, and they will be the one to influence in a positive way there. Below the line, in the lower left-hand corner, is the earth element. It adapts, but it's also very careful about things, and that's where you get your academics who are always researching things, and they are trying to cut things apart very finely and control the world by knowledge. And the lower right-hand corner is the element of water, and that is trying to build positive relationships with people and do service for others and help others as a way of being safe in the world. So there you have your four elements, and interestingly enough, they then are translated into the four suits of the tarot. The upper left-hand corner of fire are the wands, which can be set on fire. The upper right-hand corner are the swords, which are communication. The lower left-hand corner are the pentacles, or the coins. And the lower right is the water, or the cups. Now, notice that these particular elements have their natural places, so that those ones that adapt have a natural movement of downward, and the ones that take charge have a natural movement of up. Now, what's interesting about this is you will find, especially in some of Waite's early writings and in a few places, that they have changed the attributions of a couple of the suits. There are still some people that say that the wands are air, and you will find this in some of Waite's art that he had Pixie Smith do. But I think what this was an attempt to keep some of the secrets of the tarot and for him not to break his oaths completely. And there's still a debate amongst some people as to, which suit goes with what. But I think that swords works with air and discrimination, and wands works with fire. The other two aren't really debated all that much. So there's the basic structure. We have four suits, and they represent basically four different processes in dealing with the world, and four different ways in which we have our temperament, which is it's not quite our personality, but you could think of temperament as sort of the firmware of the person. It's the not quite hardware, but more the hardwired in operating system that the person has to work through. So for instance, I am a fairly earthy person because I have Capricorn rising. And so the way that I deal with the world is to grin and bear it and adapt. In medieval terms, that's the melancholic personality type. You can learn a lot more about these things, but that's about all that I'm going to say at this point. Any questions at this point? You could put in something into the chat box. Okay, so that's all pretty basic, and anybody with a basic understanding of magic will know those four elements. But what is marvelous about the deck is that what the Golden Dawn did was they found a way to make the deck represent everything in the universe and the interconnections. And what I'm going to do now is to show how the Kabbalah and a basic understanding of the Kabbalah can help you to almost instantly learn these 40 cards. And then we will chat about some of the cards as examples. Now you'll see behind me and behind the podium is a diagram. I gleaned this from the internet. It's a very basic diagram of what's known as the arcana, or the Tree of Life. There's actually a different Tree of Life in a different tradition of the Kabbalah, but this is the most common one. And what it represents is literally the universe and how it was created. And in keeping with Plato's idea of forms, which also fits well with the magical idea that there is an astral plane which has the template of everything in it, and that eventually things are emanated from the astral plane down to the material world. This diagram shows how those things show up in the real world. And yeah, it's been worked with a lot. There are a lot of different attributions to all of this. But what I'm going to mostly focus on is these 10 circles. And the 10 circles are your key to understanding the 10 cards. So, once we get those 10 circles, and then you graft on the 4 elements, then you can work with and understand the minor arcana. So let's take a look at this diagram. At the very top, you see that top circle. And what it represents is undifferentiated, just as something is coming into being. It is not quite formed in the world. It is the potential. And that is known as Kether, K-E-T-H-E-R. I will be using the Ashkenazi Hebrew for most of these pronunciations. There's a Sephardic Hebrew also. That would be Kesser. But most of the Western occultists use the Ashkenazi. And at the very top, you get this idea of where did this sound come from?
It's just a
Don't
gesture.
worry, that was somebody coming in. Don't worry.
All right. Somehow I lost my place and got bounced out of my view, but I can just talk about the 10. Oh, the 10 circles are known as sephira, or emanations. So, in any case, up at the top represents the undifferentiated whole. It hasn't really, it's just the idea, the whiff of something happening. Like you get a basic sense of something's around the corner, but it hasn't quite shown up. That circle is actually where all your aces are. And you'll be able to see in the deck that usually the aces in the Smith-Waite deck are a hand coming out of a cloud and presenting that particular element. It's either holding a pentacle or a cup or a sword. And in a sense, it represents that idea that out of this mysterious nothing, the cloudiness, something is just starting. Now, a lot of people are thrown by the aces when they see them coming up in a reading. But I have a very simple rule for that. What happens is I basically say, I tell people a little story. And the story is pretty simple. I tell people, imagine that you're sitting in a room and the door has blown open on the wind. And what's happened is the door's blown open and there's a whiff of something in the air. There's a smell of something. You don't quite know what's going to be coming behind that smell, but it's got a certain flavor. And it's got the idea that something is going to be manifesting. And what the smell or the flavor is one of four qualities. And it's either earth, air, fire, or water. If it is fire, some new opportunity for action is going to be coming up. Or it's around the corner, or you will be talked into it. If it is water, some new emotion will be coming into your life. We don't even know what it is yet, but it is the possibility of some emotional development or some new feeling, and the rest of the cards will tell us more of what it's about. If it's pentacles, some practical matter in your life will present itself. It could be something as simple as, okay, I'm finally going to clean out that closet. But it could be a new job opportunity or a new project or an opportunity to make some money, invest in something, whatever. And if it's air, it would be important conversations or an opportunity to learn something or get important information. We don't know what it is yet. And it's kind of like around the corner. So it in itself is just like a signpost saying that something is coming, but it hasn't shown up yet. And that's it for the four aces. Now, my friend Lon Milo Duquette, in a way, says that there are basically 5 cards to the deck. One is the Fool, which represents all of the 22 major arcana. And then there are the 4 aces that represent those 4 potentialities in the 4 worlds. So the aces are, in fact, fairly important. Now, what happens then? Well, the next in that diagram is the 2. It's in the upper right-hand corner. And that particular sphere represents the first breakup of that undifferentiated whole. It represents a duality. It represents it's here, it's not here. It represents both the yin and the yang. And it represents the potential just starting to become into existence. Now, here is where we see that very beginning starting to interact with the 4 elements. And you start to get then the characters in the deck. And you get to see pictures of things. The 2 of Cups representing water and representing relationship is 2 people toasting each other. The 2 of Swords, the potential for information, the person sitting there with a blindfold on and holding swords in a non-threatening manner is the potential for peace and balance. The Two of Pentacles shows someone juggling and dealing with the first manifestations of things. And the Two of Wands shows somebody standing on a parapet with two wands as they're just starting to take action in the world. And so what you get is the very beginnings of things. Now, the nice thing about the twos is they are not really manifesting. They're just starting to get the idea is coming together. And so you don't really have too much conflict with the four suits at this level. There's nothing to argue about. It's just barely come into existence. And you could see that it's come down that tree of life just a tiny little bit. Now, interestingly enough, each of those spheres also represents a planet. And you will get some modern interpretations of the Kabbalah that say that these are the outer planets like Uranus or Pluto. I'm a traditionalist and a medieval astrologer, so I do not attribute these to the outer planets. I don't think it's a useful concept at this point. Now, what happens is it starts to get more interesting because we get over to the third of the spheres. And now we get something that is a little bit more concrete in its manifestation. Because while you have a point that was the first sphere and 2 points, which is a line, which is the second sphere, if you have 3 points, you actually have a plane, and that can exist in the real world, a flat plane like a piece of paper or whatever. Now, what happens there is this then starts to interact with the four worlds a little bit more vigorously. And here we come up with one of my favorite distinctions. A lot of you may remember that there's a Three of Swords. And anybody who's seen it will remember it. It's a large heart that's pierced with 3 swords. And most of the time when people see it, they get really bummed out. Okay? They think, oh my God, my heart is being pierced. Well, what happens is, Waite knew his Kabbalah, but he didn't know his astrology. And what happens here is that particular sphere, the third one, is connected with Saturn. And Saturn is also known as the sorrowful mother in the Kabbalah. And what he's trying to depict is the idea that air likes to be free. Ideas like to bounce around and they don't like to be confined. And this is the very first opportunity they have where there's a boundary set around them. And that's what he's trying to depict with that picture. That the ideas, the air, the freedom of air doesn't like to be stuck. But what Waite didn't realize is that each of these cards also has a correspondence in astrology, which I won't get into other than to just mark this as one of my pet peeves, because the Three of Swords is Saturn in Libra, and Saturn loves being in Libra. We could think of Saturn as the old prime minister. He's been around, he knows everything. He's in a position of authority, but when he's in Libra, he is at his favorite gallery opening or at a wonderful museum. And he likes all the order there and likes the beauty. And so when this card shows up, I tell people, oh, look, there's two meanings to this. It either means that your ideas are being restricted in some way, or you're finally getting some things together and it's starting to look good. Like your plans are finally coming together and you're realizing just how you can balance things out. Because that's the second side of the card. That's Saturn in Libra. It's order and beauty at the same time. Now we also have Three of Cups, which is three maidens toasting each other. Really nice, really positive. The very beginnings of some social connection. The Three of Pentacles is someone beginning a project. He's working on carving some pentacles, and there's a rich guy and a priest who's watching him. It's the beginning of a work project. Not a bad thing. And the Three of Wands continues with this idea of dominion and control, with somebody at the top of their castle, and I believe they're either holding a globe or they're looking at a ship that's going off. It's the beginning of an adventure, the beginning of something, some action that's being taken, because wands are fire, and it's the beginning of putting something into motion. So what happens is, with each of these, what we're doing to get these pictures is taking this concept of this sphere from the Kabbalah and applying it quite simply to each of the four elements. And yes, you can say that you can add in now the planet Saturn to give you another layer of meaning. And let me pause for a second, see if anybody has questions at this point.
Give me just a minute, Alan. I need to put my feet up really quick. My foot fell
Yeah, we'll
asleep.
let the person typing put this together too. And I have to make room on my desk for my cat to sit down and get close to me. Yes, the 11th circle is known as Doth. That is somewhat of a modern innovation in Kabbalah and isn't used in looking at the cards, at least not at this point. That gets into some really esoteric stuff about the Kabbalah. Okay, so that's the threes. I think I've covered them. Now, we move across and we get to the fours. Now, what we have there is things are finally manifesting even more. And the neat thing about this point in the Kabbalistic diagram is that this is one of the points where things are actually pretty balanced.
Alan, do you need chair to
Just be
change?
1 second. Okay, so with the fours, one of the things is it's very nicely balanced, and what we're getting to is a point where it's on the right side of the diagram, and that's traditionally known as the pillar of mercy, which is where things come together rather nicely. And that part is connected with Jupiter. And so you get all of the feelings of Jupiter with generosity, connection, being watched over by something kindly and benevolent. And so when we start to look at the diagrams, we see how those start to fit with the four elements. The Four of Pentacles is somewhat of a gift. And so while there is a kind of sense with that particular diagram, people get a little bit thrown off by it because it's a fellow grasping Four Pentacles. And it could be kind of, he looks like he may be a bit on the greedy side or something, but in a sense, he's really kind of just hanging on to what's been given to him. And I usually interpret that in a fairly positive way. And I give people the sense of something's been given to you, you can hang on to it really hard and really tight, which probably isn't that good, but think of it as something which really has been given to you, and it's a new opportunity in the whole realm of the material world. Pretty simple. Now, when we come to the Four of Rods, or Wands, we see these maidens have made like a little trellis. It's almost like a trellis in a party. And once again, we have this whole idea of celebration, something positive. We get that really nice Jupiterian feeling flowing through. And so the usual idea with this is something to celebrate. And if you want, depending on the deck that you have, you can look at the astrology of each of these. What I've done, because I have so much astrology background, is I have taken an old deck, and because it's difficult, because it had sort of a covering, I scraped away the covering in one corner and I put an abbreviation of what things are astrologically. And that helps me remember and put things together. But these very basics of what we're talking about here, of these two symbols, are oftentimes enough, along with the picture, to give you a fairly good idea of what to say about the card. Not terribly hard. Now, if we look at the Four of Swords, I'm trying to recall that particular card. One second here. Wouldn't you know it? That's the one that is not coming to my mind.
If you want, I can look it up for you.
I would appreciate it if somebody could tell me.
Yep, just 1 second. Oh, it's the man lying on the table with three swords
yes.
above him.
Of course. Now, that one is actually a little deceptive, because a lot of people look at that and they think this is a really bad thing. But remember, this is a Jupiter card. This is a generous card. So what would the guy lying on the table mean? Well, what I do is I tell people, okay, this is actually a squire who's in the chapel before he's being made a knight. This is what Waite is depicting here. He is laying down and he is praying because he's about to be given knighthood the next day. And he's going to be given a new distinction, and swords are all about decisions, ideas, distinctions, obligations. That's not a dead body on a sepulcher. It is a squire who's about to be taking a new step in life. And so that particular four card has the real sense of, when it comes up, you may have somebody being given a new opportunity. They may hear of something that will put them into a new place in life, that type of thing. And so all of those are really very positive for the four. Now, did I cover all of them, or I think I have cups to go, right?
I think you do have to cover the Four of Cups.
The Four of Cups is another one where a lot of people seem to be kind of deceived by it. It shows a character sitting next to a tree, and he's got 3 cups on the ground, or on a table next to him, and a mysterious hand is coming out of a cloud, handing him another cup. Once again, we have generosity, and this is being depicted by this cup. And we have already 3 cups that he owns. And so what this card is the person is focusing in on the emotions that they have, the feelings that they have, and what they are about to be given. Now, the good side of this is somebody just needs to look and see what's being given to them, what the new emotional opportunity is. But it could mean that they are so focused on what they're doing and what they've got already that they might miss the opportunity. So this is one of the cards that I say is kind of a warning. but it's a good warning that you may have something really positive coming out. Now, we get to something really interesting because we get to the fives. The fives are all connected to Mars. And in the Kabbalah, that's the point where things readjust, where extra stuff is gotten rid of. And what I tell people reading the cards, that I'm reading the cards for, is the fives stand for a mid-course correction. It's as if you are on a huge lake or maybe an ocean, and you've set your sails and you're relaxing, and the wind is blowing you along, and all of a sudden you notice a rock, and you've got to get your act together to steer around the rock. Well, most people would rather just sail along, and the fives represent an interruption in some pattern in an area in your life. And that area is represented by which suit you're in. The one that's most frightening for most people is the Five of Pentacles, which shows some rather poor people that are just outside of what looks to be a church, and it's snowy and it's really awful, and it looks like they're having a tough time. But what I tell them is, this could be a mid-course correction, and all I have to do is turn around and go into the church, and they'll find shelter and help. The Five of Cups is the same way. There are 3 cups that are spilled and 2 that are upright, and the person can either notice what they've lost emotionally, or they can turn around and notice what's still there. The Five of Swords is a little tricky because this has to do with some question about decisions that have been made. And what the Five of Swords is talking about is watching out that you're not outsmarting yourself and not trying to take a shortcut. And that's what's being depicted in the picture. The person is doing something that they think is clever, but it's not really the right thing. The Five of Wands shows conflict, a bunch of people fighting. And I usually tell people that this represents a need to get through a conflict, and it could be an internal conflict, but it could be with other people. But some decision has to be made, and something will come out on top. It could be that they're caught up in something, and it's preventing them from really making the decision that they need to make and taking the action that they need to take. And let me see, where did I cover all of them?
I think you got all the fives.
Okay. Now, we move on to a really nice card. The sixes. You'll notice in that Kabbalah diagram, the 6 is at the center, and it is the most connected of all of the spheres in that diagram. It is the balance point in the deck. And actually, as you go from the 1s down to the 10s, you're actually manifesting things in the real world. And the 6 is the balance point. Oh, it represents all good things. You know, it's in the Kabbalah, it could be the Christ, the sacrificial God, and that sort of thing. It's connected to the sun. So all of these 6 cards are really pretty positive. One of the best of them is the nice balance point that you make when you get to rods, to wands. And the delightful thing about those rods is that you've got a guy who is on a horse, and he has a laurel wreath on him, and it's pretty obvious that he's just won some great victory, and things are going super well for him. And so what winds up happening is, this is an opportunity to tell people, oh, you've made something really positive here. You're really moving forward, and people are recognizing it. You have the opportunity to get to this balance point in your life, the sun, and use the power of the sun in fire to move yourself forward. Now, one of the things that you will notice as you study these cards, the swords in general get a bad rap. And the reason why they get a bad rap is they get worse as the numbers get higher and as they go down the tree of life. And that was hinted at with the 3 of swords, but it gets more evident as you go further down. But the 6 is a relief from that. And what we have is a guy with 6 swords in a boat that's pulling it along. And you can see, if you look carefully, the water goes from choppy to clear. And this card, is usually, one of the names for it is science, also earned success.
Alan, I'm sorry, what card was that?
The numbers get higher because and the cards get more difficult because air doesn't like to be restricted into matter. And we'll see that with the other cards. But this 6 is an exception because it's at that balance point in the Kabbalah, in this Tree of Life diagram. So he's pulling along and he's having a good time.
And which card was that with? Was that rods? I'm sorry, I didn't.
That is swords.
Ah, swords, okay.
Okay, so now we get to the 7s, and the 7s start to get interesting. I think we covered all of the 6s, didn't we? Rods. Oh, pentacles, yes. Pentacles is really nice. It's that generosity. It's a rich guy giving out money. So it is the sun along with earth, and you get that balanced point that's really nice. So it means that you then have enough to give to other people. And it works out well for them. Pentacles. Likewise, the Six of Cups is really positive. I believe that shows some children in a garden. This is where you get the kind of sense of you're having a good time, but watch out. There is a second meaning to it. It could be kind of naive. So you have to look at the other cards around and see if you have any sense that the person may be in that kind of naive sort of situation, that they're not seeing everything. Okay, so on to the sevens. Now the sevens, as I said, they get interesting because the sevens are connected in with Venus. And some of these things work well with Venus and some of them don't. Because Venus can also be, besotted with love, and you kind of get so emotionally involved that you're not quite sure what to do. And so that can be a little bit tricky. And so one of the things that is a classic example of this is the Seven of Cups. What we have is a picture of an old man, maybe a wizard, and there are 7 cups in front of him, and there are these amazing things coming out. Some of them look like monsters and dragons and gold and whatnot. Well, the technical name for this is actually debauch. It's Venus in Scorpio, which oftentimes Venus doesn't work well in Scorpio. Think of it as a beauty queen who's in a BDSM dungeon. It's not her atmosphere, sorry. But depending on the cards that are around it, again, any card can have a positive meaning. It could be that the person's really stuck and they need some inspiration, and you're asking a question. Will they get the inspiration that they need? Well, in this case, it's not this guy being lost in an opium dream and seeing these fantastic figures. It is that he's going to see the inspiration. He's going to have so many ideas. But depending on the cards around it, it could be the person is really lost and they're overwhelmed with ideas. Keep in mind, 7 as Venus is also the position in the Kabbalah for things like opium and intoxicants and alcohol and marijuana and things like that. That's the nice thing. These 10 circles and the lines that connect them can actually be a file drawer for everything in the universe. Now, the 7 of Pentacles is another one that causes some problems with people. But what we have is manifestation. Again, it's getting closer to showing up for real. But we do have that little problem of, okay, well, what's going on? It's Venus, and is it going to manifest? So the way that Waite shows it is a guy standing on some kind of a farm implement. Maybe it's a hoe, you can't really see. And he's looking at 7 pentacles that are growing on bushes. Now, the worst of this, in the Golden Dawn, they called this failure. And it's Saturn in Taurus, but it could simply mean waiting on something that's going to happen. You're simply waiting for things to ripen. And you may be a little impatient. But if you get someone who's asking you a question and you're pulling a 1-card answer, and you get this, you could say, look, just be patient. It's going to take a little while. Now, I believe that's, and 7 of rods. What's interesting here about the 7 of rods is we have a guy on a small hill, and he has a rod, and he's fighting with 6 other rods. Well, he's in the top position. He's got the advantage of height. And this card is actually called Victory. So it's action being taken along with that inspiration, that Venusian kind of feeling. And it is Mars in Leo. So it's called Valor. It's really nice. So if a person's stuck and they get this card, they could be moving forward if they have the courage for it.
Is that card Valor or Victory? First you said it was Victory.
And the 7 of Swords is a classic card of warning. Remember I said that the swords get difficult the further down towards manifestation they get. And what we have is a guy who's carrying 5 swords, and it looks like he's sneaking out of the enemy camp with 5 swords, but he's left 2 behind. And the Golden Dawn called this futility. And it's the moon in Aquarius, where it doesn't do exactly great. And when this comes up, I tell people, watch out, you might make a decision that will come back to bite you. Because if he's sneaking out with only some of the weapons and 2 are left behind, well, when they find out that things are missing, they can come back after him. So you want to, this is one of those cards. The reason why people come to see you is to find cards like this and to watch out for the warnings so that they can have some foresight to avoid these kinds of bad decisions. So in answer to a question of, is this a good or bad decision? It's a bad decision. And I think we covered all of those 7s. Now, the 8 is connected in with thinking and with Mercury. And so will Mercury go really well with some of these? Well, the 8 of Pentacles shows an apprentice who is making pentacles, and he's making sure that all of them are set and they're nicely done. And this card is called Prudence. Going over things to make sure. And it's the Sun in Virgo, and if you've ever met a Virgo, they want to make sure that everything is straightened out. And so it's a check your work kind of card. Things are coming to the final stages, and you want to make sure. Now, there's also the 8 of Rods. And this shows a bunch of rods that are flying through the air. Now, when this usually shows up, I tell people, oh, things are showing up, are moving really quickly. This is actions, decisions, and that type of thing. The classical name for this card is Swiftness, and it is a Mercury card, and it's Mercury in Sagittarius. So rods are moving quickly. Do they like being down here at the bottom of the tree? Somewhat. They're still doing okay here in the 8th spot. But the 8 of Swords is not fun. What we have is a figure who is tied up and surrounded by swords. The name of this is Interference. It is Jupiter in Gemini. Imagine Santa Claus in a room where all sorts of people are trying to do computer coding. It's like too much. And what I tell people is, and they look at this card and they see this woman who's blindfolded, tied up with swords around her, I said, this is the card of you don't have your problems have you. This is air that doesn't want to manifest, and so it's rumination. The person's going over and over and over their problems. And it just isn't working out for them. Now, maybe this could be a positive card if other cards around it. I think the only way I could think of this as positive is if the person is really manic and they're trying to slow down. That could be one way of looking at it. And then the 8 of Cups shows 8 cups and a figure is walking away from them. The name of this is Indolence. It's Saturn in Pisces, which Saturn, it's the old prime minister who's at a gathering of hippies and he doesn't quite know what to do and he'd rather move away from it. So this card is traditionally leaving some sort of emotional decision behind. Now we get down to the 9s. The 9s are connected with the moon. So we're looking at unconscious processes that are going to be combining with our 4 suits. And we're getting to almost the point where things are manifesting. Now, the 9, when it comes to pentacles, is really nice. And we have the combination of that earthiness along with the moon and kind of the passion and emotions. And so what we get is this woman in a beautiful garden with a bird on her arm. And this is symbolized by, looks like the sun in Virgo, although this is, maybe that's Mercury in Virgo. But it's a card of gain. And so if somebody's been working on something for a long time, hey, this is where it comes together. It's almost there. With the 9 of rods, we have a guy who's been injured in the battlefield. He's got a bandage on his head, but he's managed to make it all through. He's gotten through it, and this is a card of strength. It's not the major arcana card of strength, but it's you've made those decisions, you've made the battles, you've managed to get through, you have a break, and you're able to celebrate. Now, the 9 of Swords is a little scary for folks. And what it is it's a figure sitting up in bed, obviously having had a bad dream, with 9 swords sort of hanging over her head. Well, the difficulty here is, again, these swords don't want to manifest. And the ideas are coming in and they're manifesting. And the picture of this is somebody whose ideas are coming up from the unconscious and even waking them up. The card is called Cruelty, and it's Mars in Gemini. So that's kind of a vision of that. The good side of this is that whatever they're scared of, they now know what's important to deal with. And it could be that whatever the problem is that they didn't understand is now manifest and they can deal with it. But if it's a future card, it could be that something's going to come up that might upset the person, or it might be a revelation that they have to deal with, or it could be something that they need to pay attention to in their unconscious. And finally, we get down to the end, down to Earth, manifestation. That's the 10th sphere. And what cards do well when they manifest? Well, one of the cards that does well, obviously, is Earth. Earth wants to manifest. So we get an old man with, obviously, his son or daughter and in-laws, 2 younger people behind him, a grandchild on his lap, a very nice cat on his lap, and 10 pentacles all around. Card represents wealth. And that means that all of these plans, all of these practical things are now coming together. The combination of Earth in an earthy sign, it finally manifests and comes together. Now, remember I was telling you there are other things that are good. The 10 of Cups is a positive card. It shows a happy couple with 2 kids playing in the foreground, a beautiful rainbow with 10 cups in it. And all of this is manifested very nicely. The actions and the decisions that have happened lead to a good, positive conclusion emotionally. The 10 of Swords, however, is another matter. And I'll tell you, though, that this can actually be a good card. It shows a body that is lying on the ground face down, which is prone, and there are 10 swords stuck in it, in the body. The card is known as Ruin, and most of the time it's a bad sign. However, I did have one year which was really horrible, and my group was pulling cards for the coming year, and I really actually wanted the 10 of Swords because I wanted this horrible year to end. And a body lying on the ground with 10 swords stuck in it is about as ending as you can get. And so if you're looking for something to end and you get this card, it's ending. And for the final one at this point, and I don't think I'll have time, I'm already very aware that I'm past time. We have the 10 of rods. That shows an old man carrying 10 rods to a castle, which is still a little distance away, but it looks like he'll make it. And it's a burden, it's oppression. That willpower that comes with rods is finally reaching the very end, and it's like exhausting, but you'll get there. So it could mean somebody's having a tough time of it, but if they make the final stages, they'll make it through. So to summarize all of this, learn your Kabbalah. Now, and combined with the 4 elements of the 4 suits, you have a way of understanding those 4 cards relatively quickly. Now, what are some resources to get this Kabbalistic stuff done quickly and to get an idea of it? Well, there's always YouTube, and probably somebody's lectured. But I recommend 2 different books. One is a book by my friend Lon Milo Duquette. He's a high mucky muck in Crowley's OTO, and he wrote a book called The Chicken Kabbalah of Rabbi Lamed Ben Clifford. It is a humorous look at the Kabbalah, but it is very accurate. And in that one book, you will get a lot of Kabbalistic knowledge, and you'll get an idea of these 10 Sephirah, and you'll also get the lines that connect them, and you'll find out how the 4 elements are 4 worlds that describe how even your magic manifests. And I believe you can even download it as a Kindle book. The other book that I recommend is by Israel Regardie, and that is Foundations of Practical Magic. And Regardie was Aleister Crowley's secretary, and he was an initiate in the Golden Dawn system that the deck is based on, that we're doing this method of interpretation. There are other ways of doing it, but in Foundations of Practical Magic, he gives 1 chapter on the basics of Kabbalah. He also has a wonderful little chapter which was published as a separate book called The Art of True Healing. And that book shows you how to manifest things and how to do a very powerful meditation called the middle pillar, which for those of you who are in traditions that are connected in with ceremonial magic, it's very basic and very good. He also has a really interesting chapter showing the magic in Buddhism and a few other things. It's a really, really good beginning book, Foundations of Practical Magic. It's out in paperback. I don't know if it's still in print, but you can get used copies. But yes, the 1 chapter is a marvelous summary of Kabbalah. So, the other final key to all of this, folks, which I didn't realize until some years later. You notice that I said that there were planets connected with these 10 spheres. The bottom one is Earth, the next one is the Moon, the next one is Mercury, the next one is Venus, then you get to Mars, then you get to the Sun, then you get to Jupiter, and then you get to Saturn. That is the distance of the planets from the Earth as seen in the ancient schema of when the Earth was considered to be the center. It is also the way that the soul ascends to higher levels of consciousness is through those spheres of the planets. And in astrology, once the soul has come in on the ascendant, it goes through the spheres of those planets and gets imprinted and then comes in to the ascendant to be born. So the conditions of those planets at birth imprint themselves as you are incarnated. It also probably is the system that was used in the ancient Mithraic mysteries, which was a Roman, a mystery religion of the Roman legions, and they had 7 different levels for each of the planets, and you were initiated into those different levels as you grew in that tradition. So you see a pattern of the whole universe in this diagram, a pattern of incarnation into the world, and a pattern of ascending into the higher levels of consciousness that's reflected by these 10 spheres, which are reflected in the planets and reflected in all the rest of this. And we're coming up basically on the end here.
Alan,
So your hands are doing good. You've made it all the way
my
through.
My hands are not doing good right now at all.
You made it through.
I made it through most of it. I just could not focus on that last part that you said because we were going a wee bit too fast because I know that you know that you're over time by like a half an hour, which is like, it's fine. I'll just go back through and type it out in the video. I'll go back in a couple of days and I'll be able to get all that you said.
Yes.
I'm sorry,
Folks,
Dragon.
Folks, we are over time.